In 100 years' time, the human race will have a problem to solve. Our hospitals will be fuller than ever, with patients that are older than ever, suffering from a range of diseases that we currently don't have to deal with. And the kicker, we won't have any new pharmaceuticals to deal with them. So what hope do we have? What new scientific advances are going to rescue us from this fate? Well, I believe that cell biology, the science of the cells that make up our body, holds the key. And I would say this, I am actually a cell biologist. I've worked on all types of cells, from neurons, immune cells, to embryonic cells, all parts of the trillions of cells that make up our body. And I'd like to put forward one central idea. I see that rather than drugs and pharmaceuticals, the next frontier in modern medicine will be harnessing our own cells and the cells of each other to heal us. And I call this the cell revolution. And I hope that I can convince you that we can take charge of this, we can use this to heal us and to empower us. And if you remember one thing about today, it's that we use our cells in the future by our own decision only. So what's going to change between now and 2120? Well, first, we're going to be old, really old. So I'm not going to be around in 100 years' time, but it's not crazy to think that my 2-year-old daughter won't be. And if I'm right, she's going to be part of an increasingly aging society where being 102 years old probably doesn't even make her the oldest in the room. Within the next 20 years, that for the first time, the human race are going to start giving birth to children that can expect to celebrate over 100 birthdays, particularly the girls. So we'll be living longer and longer. And there'll be many more of us in 100 years' time. We currently have about 7 billion people on the planet. We can expect maybe about half again by 2120. And that means there'll be many more of us sharing the same amount of space, the same amount of resources. And that's the case even in Australia, where the birth rate is falling. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a bit older, a bit more seasoned, a bit more experienced. I hope to be old myself one day. And there's nothing actually wrong with having more people on the planet. But it is a fact that increased population density and increased age bring new disease. And when we consider how these population changes are going to impact the environment and change it, well, we're going to have a hotter, more polluted climate. It's clear to see that staying healthy in the future is going to require us to solve a whole new set of medical challenges. So how do we do this? Well, that brings me on to my second point, and I'm sorry to say it's not very optimistic. It is entirely possible that 100 years from now, the development of new drugs will have stopped completely. So how can this possibly be true? First of all, let me just take a step back and explain what I mean by a drug. Most pharmaceuticals that we take are very small molecules, and they enter the body, they enter our cells, and they physically bind with specific proteins in the cell. In doing so, they change the nature of that cell and any process that it's involved in. When they work well, they can have useful therapeutic effects, lowering blood pressure, lowering swelling, killing pain, even helping people who wake up with sore throats, who have important talks to give that afternoon. So big pharmaceutical companies adopted a very simple way of doing business. Find the protein of a disease of interest, use either lab work or increasingly computers to search for molecules that might bind it in a useful way, test it, put it in a pill, and sell it. And it actually has given us some great advances. It really has, all the way from chemotherapies to antidepressants. But this approach isn't working anymore. The cost of researching and developing a drug has doubled every decade since 1950. The costs are high for one simple reason. So many more attempts now have to be run in order to find a successful hit. What that means is big pharma are having to run more and more and more tests and trials to actually achieve fewer and fewer and fewer success stories. As a result, there are people now that even question the commercial viability of drug design in this way at all. And the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies have taken note. They've already started to respond. They've cut funding into areas that are particularly troublesome. This happens to include treatment for Alzheimer's, obesity, and the generation of new antibiotics, all three of which will be critical in a densely populated Earth with an aging human race. Remember, these guys, they don't make drugs out of the kindness of their hearts. And as a scientist, I can tell you any experimental approach has its limits, And it may well be, in this regard, the lowest hanging fruit have been picked. So if we cast our minds back to this futuristic hospital, if we're in need of new medication, but pharmaceuticals have run the well dry, where will we turn? Well, I believe the next wave of medicine doesn't come from a pill, but is instead made up of human cells, and we can use these to treat disease. This is not actually a new idea, but I'm very pleased to say it's one that's looking feasible for the first time recently. And this is evident with stem cell technology. Now, stem cells are special cells in the body that can make any cell. As it turns out, this can't just happen. A muscle cell can't just make another muscle cell. The neurons in your brain can't just split in two to make more of themselves. They require stem cells to do this. And if stem cells can make any cell in the body, then they can replace any cell in the body, any disease or injured cell. And giving someone else your stem cells, well, it already happens. We actually already give bone marrow transplants to people, particularly sufferers of leukemia. And when you donate your bone marrow, what you're actually donating are your cells. A population of your stem cells from you that will generate new blood cells to replenish the patient. But stem cells are hard to come by and ethically complicated. So instead, I imagine that technology that is currently only in the lab will be widespread 100 years from now, where you can take a cell from a patient, any cell, and turn it back into a stem cell. Imagine the day when someone suffering from a head trauma comes into a hospital, not for surgery, not for treatment, but to have a mouth swab. And those cells from inside the cheek could be turned into stem cells and re-injected into the brain right at the site of injury. There they can take cues from their local environment and make new neurons, repair the site of damage. No need for new drugs. And this principle doesn't stop with stem cells. Other types of cells can be used too. Your immune system actually has the ability to fight cancer, and it's doing it all the time. Throughout your life, it will keep very small growths in check. But if these growths become too large, they overwhelm the immune system, they exhaust it, and you develop a cancerous malignancy. New technologies take these killer immune cells from the patient, from the cancer patient, and they change their genetic code to enhance and better focus their cancer-killing ability. They then grow them up, increase the number of them, and re-infuse them back into the patient. Now these amped-up killer cells can have a fighting chance against the tumor. And this is already working in patients. I see this growing exponentially between now and 2120. And I see that alongside blood banks, we can have banks of frozen killer immune cells. One for each type of cancer, one for each stage of cancer. So that immediately after diagnosis, you can be shipped off, have the right cells, the right immune cells thawed out, and infused back into you. And along with the pluripotent stem cell technology and organ growth and related technologies, I think that cell revolution will be a big part of medicine in the next 100 years. And I suggest to you all that the cell revolution will cause us to change how we think about our bodies and the cells that make us up. I mean, what if your cells are better at fighting cancer than mine? Can I have some? We already do this with sperm and eggs. You can sell them. I myself have a blood type that's pretty desirable. I'm a universal donor, which means along with 6.6% of the people in this room, I could give blood to anyone. That's good champagne that hospitals want lots of. With 10.5 billion people in the earth in 2120, will we be able to screen and find individuals who escape cancer, who don't develop liver disease, who can heal wounds without scars? Can we help ourselves to their cells? What if they don't want to share them? There are some that will tell you that for the common good, we should be able to own them, sell them, and even copyright them. And using cells actually goes all the way beyond medicine. I think the cell revolution has even started in the cosmetic. I can't believe how many moisturizers claim to have animal placenta in them. Google how many moisturizers say they have stem cells in them at the moment. How long before companies are putting active human stem cells in the moisturizer? How long before you can buy Kylie Jenner's stem cells in your moisturizer? So my talk today, it isn't about some impending catastrophe. Thankfully, I'm not a climate scientist. But it is about a change that is happening. It's already started. We've hit peak drugs. And all I want us to do really is to think about how we can take control of this. And I'd like to end by thinking about 2 ways we could do it. Number one, we need to decide who gets this treatment. The technologies I've described are expensive. My research is expensive. Who's this going to be for? Super rich older nations with increasingly aging populations, or for everyone? And how will these decisions be made? Research and development priorities are currently decided by market forces and increasingly the philanthropy of a super rich people. I'm not here to preach politics or economics, but these are how these decisions are made, and we ignore them at our peril. And finally, I want to think more about what I'm calling biological sovereignty in the age of the cell revolution. And I'll end with an example. Along with the whole cell biology community, I use a type of cell in my research called HeLa cells. These cells have wonderful research properties. But they were taken from a patient called Henrietta Lacks in 1951 from a cervical tumor biopsy. And no one asked her. No one even told her or her family. And they didn't find out until 24 years later. Evolution has bestowed many mysteries upon all of us, and we need to do better to recognize those that choose to share that with us and to protect those who decide they don't want to. We need to remember that we own ourselves, our biological sovereignty, and that I hope we can remember to think of the ways in which these can be shared, the ways in which these are private, and the hope that these have for healing us in the future. Thank you very much.